Hey everybody, Gurmy's Coaster Yard here, and in today's episode of Germanator Studios, before doing more work on our hotel, we are starting by putting back our ferry boat ride on our little lake. Apparently, I deleted that at some point to do some work, probably when I worked on the docks. I never put it back in, so we're putting it back in here. But in the spirit of working on this ferry boat, I swear, every time I do any work on it, I put it in, then I find some reason that I need to delete it to work on something. And in this case, as you will see, hopefully in a few minutes, at some point, I decide that I don't like the angle at which it enters the dock near the front entrance. It sort of does a hairpin turn to get in there, and I just didn't really like that. So as you'll see here in a moment, it'll do that hairpin turn, and I decided I wanted to build up one of those sort of breakwaters like we built up previously working on this project, to make that angle a little bit less sharp. And so here you can see me working on that now, and I spent quite a bit of time trying to figure out where exactly I wanted it, to make sure the angle was just right. And I went back and forth a bunch, and eventually at some point you'll see me settle on something, but I don't remember exactly what I did because I think I worked on this several days ago. Anyhow, yeah, very indecisive. But I think in the end I decided along this edge, this flat edge right up against our little dock platform, just because, yeah, it was right up against there, so it would be, I don't know how to explain it, but basically just an angle. I don't know. It was an angle that I liked. I'll put it that way. And so I did a little test run there to see how it looked, and I thought it looked good. So then I put the other dock in back at the other port. And yeah, that should be the final time we work on this ferry boat project. Fingers crossed. And yeah, I'm pretty satisfied with how it's turned out. And yeah, but I won't spend too much more time on this topic because the footage is about to end, and we'll be moving on to other things. And also, we've already, covered this in depth in a previous episode. So, with that transition, we are moving on to our resort. So we don't finish it in this episode. However, I basically built up the entire front, sort of the whole public area of the resort, I guess. So right now we're working on the main entrance. We did the rotunda in the last episode, and now we're basically working on the path to the rotunda. And I spent a little bit of time deliberating how I wanted to do this, and you can see where I placed some paths to see if that would work, but ultimately I decided I don't think I'm going to have anybody entering or exiting that main entrance area. At least it won't be available to peeps. I might somehow connect a pathway later on to some of the entrances or something. That way this resort is a little more accessible for the peeps. Because eventually, and I sort of mentioned this in the last episode, and eventually we'll put, and by eventually I mean later in this episode, we will put a restaurant in here, as well as some gift shops, more of like a necessity, like a convenience store type of thing that we're going to build. But right now we're working on this main area, and I realized that the floor of the rotunda is level with the ground, and this main entrance is 1/3 of a 1/3 height above the ground. So I had to come up with a way to get a ramp down there, and I settled on just adjusting the terrain. This wasn't really my first choice, but because I didn't want to mess with the scenery up above it, but I decided, well, it's only going to be one tile. It's just one scenery piece, one roof piece that I will have to adjust, so that's just fine. So that is what I did, and you can see me working on that now, and just adding in some railings there for any guests so they don't fall over that little spot. And after that, yes, so I wanted to build a reception spot so that way guests entering the hotel can check in. So you can sort of see me putting in that little desk there using the 1/3 height walls. And then along here I started sort of experimenting with where I wanted to have a staircase, because obviously we need some stairs and some elevators too to reach the different levels of the rotunda and subsequently the different levels of the hotel, sorry. And I decided to use these opposite corners in the hotel for the staircase. And I figured having the doorways alternating for each level would probably provide enough space for one flight of stairs to get down from each one, given that we have 3 tiles. But I don't complete these staircases because there's not really, aside from like spiral staircases with that little western wall set, there's not really any proper way to do staircases for interiors because this is Roller Coaster Tycoon and not Hotel Tycoon. But I did the best I could. And in the meantime, right along that back, or sorry, that's the front wall of the rotunda, I put in some balconies just to have a little overlook and to make the space feel more open. And then right in this entrance, I decided to have a fountain just to be kind of elegant. And I'm pretty satisfied with how that turned out. The only real issue I had with it is that if the water basin is kind of elevated from the ground, but I couldn't put any sort of flat tile in there without it covering up the water. Anyhow, continuing with this sort of architectural theme, I decided to use the block walls, the light blue block walls, and build those up along that entrance area and make that the wall for those first 3 walls before the upper section being the slate walls, if that makes sense. And then we're just building out this front of house area, and I figured this would more or less be office space. And maybe some public rooms or something, but I didn't really build anything specific in here. I don't even think I built out different floors. I just figured it would be an open office space for, the hotel's general manager or that other people working at the hotel. So that's sort of what I was going for there. And then along here, just building in those walls, and for whatever reason, I can't remember, I just had to account, I think it was for the elevation difference between the 2 platforms. I just had to leave a couple 2/3 height gaps in there to fill with a 2/3 height wall. Now, one thing you'll notice is I wanted a little border between the slate wall and the block wall, so I used our office roof with the edge, and I ended up, because that is a whole tile piece, it extended to the inside of this building, so I decided to make a little walkway. But I realized now that that's not at the same elevation as the rotunda floor, so I figured, well, it can just be a decorative walkway and not serve any actual purpose. But maybe we'll put some plants up there and make it sort of like a decoration space that maybe like they could put seasonal decorations up there or something. Maybe I'll do that in the next episode if I remember. But anyhow, that is what I did there so on the inside, just to compensate for the extra size of those pieces. Anyhow, now what are we working on? Just the little back wall there of that roof to fully enclose the space. So nothing too crazy there. And what do we do after this? I think we're putting in elevators after this. Oh no, I know what we're going to do. So before we put in the elevator shafts, yes, we put in some windows there just to make sure we're getting more natural lighting throughout the day, right along the top there. And at some point here, we're going to enclose our little office areas with roofs, and it looks like that's what we're about to do. So I just put those in there and made that edge blue in color on the front edge, and then we'll make it black in color, I believe, or I guess gray in color along that top edge of the other roof. And I just did that because I knew if we didn't put that little edge piece there, there would be a small little lip because of the difference in height between the roof pieces, the actual like slanted roof pieces, and the office roof pieces. So to compensate for that, I used the piece that had the little curved edge. And that is that portion of the build done. And now, what are we building? We're putting in some air conditioning units because those are necessary for hopefully obvious reasons to keep the place cool, and putting in some elevator shafts. And I started with 2 shafts, but I realized the way those doors are aligned, they wouldn't both be able to open at the same time without going into each other's space. It just within the physical realm of this hotel or whatever, it wouldn't work. So I decided to just have one elevator shaft here, and we'll put in well, you'll see in a moment what I do. But I put in the one elevator shaft, and then I do one on the opposite corner. So this big round room from the outside will become square in shape. And here you can see me getting ready to build the other elevator shaft, just so that way there are enough for all of the traffic coming in and out, especially at the beginning and end of the days. And as we build out this hotel as well, probably for each wing, I'll also have a designated couple of elevator shafts. But anyway, I realized there was still a little bit of extra space, and you can see there too at the top of the building where I just put a little doorway for like a maintenance door for the top of the elevator shaft. And this will change a little bit because in that extra 1x2 section on each side, I decided, you know what, there's room there for some storage space, so I'll build some like janitorial closets or whatever for the housekeeping department, or maybe it's like a maintenance closet, who knows. It doesn't really matter. But what does matter is I realized those closets could act as ports, I guess, for roof access. So eventually I built those up to be level with the height of the elevator shaft. That way in the top closet there could be like a staircase going up, or maybe a ladder going up to a door for roof access. And I figured that would be a plausible explanation for that, because in most places, especially if the elevator shaft has roof access, you need a staircase or some sort of private hatchway to get onto the roof, so you can enter the elevator shaft. But anyhow, of course that doesn't go for every elevator shaft, but that's just what I decided to do for this one. So you can see we basically made a little L-shaped spot on top of the roof instead of just having the single square. But you're probably tired of listening me to ramble on about that, so I will try not to any longer, because that's basically the end of this little portion of the build. And now we are moving on. So in this area I wanted to have, well, not this area on the screen now, but between the train station or the monorail station, I should say, and the rest of the building, I wanted to have like a sort of large open eating area, so that way guys could get off the monorail and go to the restaurant, or yeah, well, that's the main portion, and I'll talk about the rest when I build it. And I knew I wanted this hotel restaurant to be on the nicer end. Ultimately, it's not like a nice sit-down restaurant, but I think it gets the job done in terms of just an open area with nice food. So I end up putting in a steakhouse as well as just a stand to get drinks. And I knew on either side I wanted to have big open windows just to make this space feel larger and get a lot of natural light. Now, unfortunately, these office windows I used are not actually transparent, so it's more of the idea of it than anything, but we do put in skylights towards the end of this project as well, just to make sure there is some actual natural light getting in there. Not that it makes a big difference. The shadows in RollerCoaster Tycoon 3 are more or less ineffective at blocking light. But anyhow, yeah, so we're just building that out here. And the way I decided to do this in the end, in a moment when I work on the path, you'll see me do the path around the whole perimeter of this room. But I decided, and I was going to have like an eating area in the middle and make that sort of the restaurant. Like it's sort of an open restaurant, but within an enclosed perimeter. And you can see me working on that here. But I decided, just given the parameters of the game and the limited space we had to work with, and the fact that in the end, if you want to have a restaurant in RollerCoaster Tycoon 3, it has to be a stall, I decided, you know what, instead we'll just sort of make up our own little kitchen space, and then have room for a couple of stalls within the game. And that's what you can see me working on here. And I was going to place the stalls along that back wall, but because of the wall being on the inner edge, the stalls would not fit in that position, as you'll see. So I had to move them forward one block, and that's what we ended up doing. And I realized there was still space for the pathway and for the eating area, so it didn't really matter to me too much to do that. And yeah, that also lets us make that whole behind the scenes space entirely open for storage or cooking or whatever it would be. And one thing I forgot to do in this episode is create an egress point for the kitchen. So putting an outside door on there for and coolers for food storage, of course. So that'll be something we have to address in the next episode as well. So I'll have to make a note of that. But here you can see me using the booth technique just to make the benches facing each other. And then along this back wall I had an extra tile of space, so I decided to build a planter along here and put some trees in and just really fill out this edge of the room and make it feel a little more natural. And I messed around with putting the Douglas firs in there, but I decided to stick with the sugar pines because they're just taller and add more space. And I added them on both sides, but these ones are on the other side. They're sitting on top of the roof there, so they extend a little higher to the ceiling. And in fact, maybe I'll see if I can put large sugar pines on the other side, the first side. That way they can sort of cap at similar heights, I guess, if that makes sense. But nevertheless, we put some medium height ones in there on both sides. So yeah, we got a running list now of things that we should maybe look into in the next episode. And here you can just see me setting the food or the stalls to a steakhouse, and then I'll also change the colors of the counters. It's a subtle detail, but I like to change those colors just to be a little more fitting with the theme, and it makes things a little less bland and a little more cohesive when you do that. And then finally along here, I decided to build our little convenience store area. And my reasoning for this was so that way guests staying in the hotel could buy sort of commodities that they might need for their stay. So one of those things would be, let's see, I know we put in a sunscreen stall and a swimsuit stall, as well as an inflatable stall. So if guests are going to the water park, they can purchase those things there. And then on the other side, I think we put an information booth and an umbrella stand, and some other third thing. I think a souvenir shop is what we did, but I don't quite recall. So just a little area where guests can purchase those necessities or commodities. And one thing I may try to do too is maybe add a small little breakfast area, so that way they can get their coffee and donuts in the morning. That's something we don't have yet, and I think that could be beneficial. Anyhow, we are just filling this out now, and eventually I'll put a roof over this space when I finish putting the stalls in. And you'll notice that sort of T-shaped area. It shouldn't be any surprise at this point that when I build shops or restaurants, I like to have utility areas. In this case, it would obviously be a stock room where they can keep their extra supplies. And so when I finish that, you'll see me put in some doors for each line of counters, and then a door on the outside for their access. And I tried to sort of lay this out efficiently, so I put the doors in a way that when you enter from, when you go to the base of that T shape, there could be shelving along there, and then on either side of the little cross portion, if that makes sense. So I tried to sort of optimize the shape of that room or the layout. And then finally, I started to just put solid walls in here, but I realized that will really close off the space when you're in there, and I want it to feel a little bigger and more open, kind of like the eating area. So I decided to take those same end caps we did in the eating area and sort of apply that same thing with those city windows. But first, I realized, well, we have all this open space elevation wise. Maybe I can make sort of an overlook that sort of, so guests who are in the rotunda can walk across the little bridge and go overlook that area. And I guess at this point, maybe I could try adding a staircase too in there, so that way it's not just a dead end for those guests. But you'll see what I mean in a moment when I start building this. So I built this big T shape, another T shape, and I saved it as a custom scenery piece. And I did that so you can see here we get a little sort of triple decker, a triple decker overlook for this area, and it just makes it more open and gives it a bigger feel. And I'm pretty satisfied with how that turned out. But again, I may try and add a staircase or something on either end of that cross section, just so that way guests on there can also sort of theoretically get down to the eating area. So we'll have to figure out how or if we want to do that. But anyway, now we are just putting in this. So I wanted to do one more level up just to make sure the room is nice and elevated, and where those blue brick walls or the block walls are, I just did that so that way the windows don't end right on the edge. There can be a little bit of a gap between them. And I used the full height walls in the restaurant area, but I decided to go for 1/3 height walls over here just because of the connecting space. I didn't want it to be the same height, and it didn't need to be the same height. So you'll see when I put the roofs in how those are at different elevations, and it just makes it feel, I guess, a little more realistic. I don't really know how else to explain it, but this is just how I decided to do it. Anyway. And then of course this balcony structure needed some support, so I put some along around the place just to make it a little more realistic. And eventually I just left it in the center because that seemed to be the most open sort of portion. But I figured the sections up against the walls could have their own. They'd be supported by the wall itself. That was my idea. Anyhow, I feel like that's not making sense. So I'm going to move on. We're building the roof now. And this is pretty straightforward. Like I mentioned, we're going to build some skylights. And those use the same technique I used for the train station and our dinosaur dark ride. Just elevating the skylights by 1/3 height from the roof itself. And I think I'm pretty sure the reason I started doing that initially was because when you put them right at the same level of the roof, it just felt a little unrealistic, and I just didn't like the way it looked. But having them elevated just feels a little more realistic to me. So here you can see me doing that. And it's nothing too crazy, as I like to say. But anyway, what is next? I think I know what's next. Well, first we got to build some air conditioners. Got to keep the guests cool. They got to cool off on a hot day. And then, just filling out this roof. No skylight on this one. Of course, we could add one. But yeah, and then putting in some air conditioners there. And then, of course, I wanted to build these air conditioners on over the rotunda and everywhere else, just to make sure the climate control of this building was as good as it needed to be. And then, who knows what we do next? I don't know. Yes. So, wanted to give this area a little more function, so I decided to put in a restroom stall just indented into this little area. And that's just right off from the restaurant and underneath the train station where that is. And then, as promised in the last episode, I am fixing this little support here in the rotunda. And what else? Fun. I don't know what I'm doing. At least I'm not like having an attack of slap happiness like I did at the end of the last episode, but I am well rested because I have a long drive ahead of me tonight, going to a concert a couple hours away. But anyway, now it's nighttime in there. I was just installing some lighting just to make sure that guests can see when there is no natural light. And then right along there, you can see where I just put a little, what do you call it? Handrail, so guests don't fall from that one balcony section that wasn't connected to a bridge. And now I'm lighting up the rotunda, and this was a fun little challenge. trying to get lights in areas where I could not put the camera, and doing that in an efficient way where I didn't have to go into the free look camera. And even now, I'm not doing it efficiently because I forgot that these lights are full height, so I can just hold shift and stack them. And this is right here where I discovered that, and I discovered that that is the right height. So that made things easier in the really constricted areas, where I'm working now, where I had to get the camera up real close. And I knew that there were 5 levels, so I just held shift and clicked the lights 5 times, and that was one for each level. And I did those all around the perimeter. But that's going to do it for this episode. Thank you guys for watching. Here's some shots of the finished product. I'll see you guys in the next episode, and have a great rest of your day. Goodbye.